Welcome back. I am Pastor Doug. We now continue with part 28 in our series entitled A Survey of Paul's Letter to the Romans. For the believer, the sin issue as it pertains to salvation is forever settled at the moment he or she is born again. Although a believer's salvation is never in jeopardy, this does not mean that there aren't serious ramifications for the post-salvation sins we commit. Among those ramifications is the disabling effect that known sin that is not confessed and forsaken has on the quality of one's post-salvation spiritual life here on earth. In addition to divine discipline that can result in anything from living with a guilty conscience up to and including physical death, a born-again believer who is out of fellowship with God cannot produce divine good. John 15:5. This may seem trivial to a believer who has not advanced in his walk with God, but to a disciple, it is devastating. It's like being a bird that can no longer fly or a fish that can no longer swim. The very purpose and meaning in life here on earth has been put on hold. One can remain religious and produce human good while out of fellowship, but cannot produce divine good that glorifies God, John 15:5, or that results in eternal rewards, 1 Corinthians 3:12 through 15, for the believer. We do not serve God in order to be rewarded, but the rewards and blessings that God desires to give us both in time and in eternity are well documented in Scripture. It is when we are out of fellowship with God that we are most vulnerable to the influence of the fallen nature within us. We either totally reject the concept of being out of fellowship or try all kinds of false substitutes to regain it. This makes it obvious why Satan works long and hard to deceive us into equating human good with divine good and religion with spirituality. This reveals the prolonged devastation that post-salvation sin can have on our post-salvation spiritual life. When pastors speak of sin not being an issue for those born again, we are speaking of sin in relation to salvation, not the execution of the post-salvation spiritual life. These periods of time out of fellowship can be as brief as the time it takes to confess and to forsake the sin, or can last for the rest of his or her post-salvation spiritual life here on earth, if one chooses not to confess and or forsake the known sin. Fellowship with God is restored if and when known sins are confessed, 1 John 1:9, and forsaken, John 8:11. To confess but not to forsake a sin leaves the believer in a revolving door at the entrance into a productive post-salvation spiritual life. It is for this reason that such sins as pride, immoral relationships, judging and refusing to forgive others, renders scores of born-again believers saved but disabled in the execution of the post-salvation spiritual life.